All right, today we will begin in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11. Some of you hear me say that, and right away you know we're talking about the hall of faith. When the author just starts going into the Old Testament examples of faith. Two of the examples were mentioned in more detail than the rest of them. Some of them just mentioned by name. Some of them not even mentioned by name. Some of them just inferred by things that they had done. A list of things. I particularly like it when he gets more generic. Verse 33, when he says, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens, women received the dead raised to life again, and others were tortured and being not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn asunder, they were tempted, they were slain with a sword, they wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, received not the promise, God having provided some better thing for us, that they without us should not be made perfect. That's quite a list. It's quite a mouthful. And that's just one thing after another, different individuals, men who had, and women who had done wonderful things, all in the name of faith. But there are two individuals that I had not made reference to who were mentioned in more detail. They are Abraham and Moses. Today, I would like you to focus in with me as we take a look at some of the qualities of Moses, the way it's described here in Hebrews chapter 11. Now we will read verses 23 through 29. Hebrews 11, 23 through 29, it says, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw that he was a proper child. They were not afraid of the king's commandment. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, where he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith, he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king. He endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith, he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned. Talk about a good resume. That's something right there. Moses is described here, and I will go ahead and tell you that you are welcome for showing you some of these beautiful gems that are found within the scriptures. I mean, there's all kinds of good ones, but you ever get across to one of those verses and you almost, when you get reminded of it, you think, oh man, that's a good one. You know, a couple of these are some of those, especially esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. He didn't even know Jesus like the way we know him, did he? But he did. He didn't really know all the details, but the author still was able to make this statement as if factual, that he was able to recognize the sufferings of Jesus greater than the treasures in Egypt. Verse 25, another one of those gems found within the reservoir of amazing verses. Verse 25, choosing rather to suffer the affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. It's neat because it describes even time and the transient nature of our existence here on this earth. So I'm talking about how whenever you choose sin, you're really just choosing this temporary nothingness that is going to be gone. It's going to be all just wasted away. But whenever you choose Christ, it's eternal. So that's really neat, the way he writes it there. But what I want to do is take a look at just the way it is brought forth to us here. These are the stories that the children hear. These are the stories that many who were raised in the church grew up hearing these stories. These are the stories that I want to remind you of. The good old stories of Moses being put in the river. And there was the king who was afraid of the Jewish people, the Hebrews, and knew that if they were to grow much more, that they would actually be able to conquer and take Egypt for themselves. And so, of course, he had to take things into his own hands. He had to take control. And that's what a lot of people try to do. We talked about it in the class this morning, how we often try to have this independence and say, I'm going to do things on my own. And we kind of clinch, we hang on to things, we try to control things. Meanwhile, God's got everything under control that's going to happen according to his will. He will decide what ends up happening. He will have the last laugh. There's an actual verse that talks about God laughing in the similar kind of context. It says in Proverbs chapter 1 that he will laugh at those who scorn. So God will have the last laugh with Pharaoh and Pharaoh's son. God had the last laugh. In fact, God raised him up for the purpose of showing how powerful he truly is. Now, whenever we go to the Word of God, we read these stories, we think about them, we often wonder, we contemplate, we reflect, we ponder. So often we find ourselves even in a state of confusion, right? Thinking about life, I think we numb ourselves often, and we almost have this gulf between us and a full understanding of all things. God made it so. But if we think about things too much, it can almost be depressing. Like, why are some people born under these circumstances? Why are others born under what seems to be so much better circumstances? Why is it that probably billions and billions of potential souls weren't even able to see the light of day at all? Why is it that some are afflicted, like some of the people that we've been praying about? The little girl that is stuck in a hospital room for much of her life that we've been praying for, Jenny's great niece. Why is it that some people have that kind of disposition that they just are thrown into, it seems? What is it with God? Why does he treat things so unequally? Why does he distribute so unequally according to the genetic pool? How does it work? Why does it work this way? And we have to think about those kinds of things. If we don't, then we're not thinking about reality. We have to understand. We have to think. We have to wonder. And the oftentimes disappointing fact is we have to come to a realization that we don't have those answers all the time. Some we do. Some answers we have. We have the greatest of answers. We have Jesus the Christ. So you got that answer right there. What about all the other things? What about all the other things that are so confusing, things that are so difficult for us to take on emotionally as humans? Why must it be this way? That's a question that was addressed in the, somewhat anyway, in the Roman epistle, chapter 9. And the Apostle Paul quoted some of the prophets, and he said, it's not really our right to look at God and say, why have you made me this way? The potter has power over the clay. And it's not really within our grasp to understand why certain things, a certain course of events happen and transpire the way they do. However, the purpose of the lesson today is to at least experiment a little bit with that question and look at it through the eyes of this story that we are here looking at right now. Because don't you just wonder how the parents felt as the Pharaoh's soldiers were butchering their sons? Don't you just wonder, from a human emotional perspective, why would God allow such an atrocious thing to happen? As parents, as people, we can actually interject ourselves into a story like that and wonder. And the reason why I bring it up in this way is because these are the kinds of stories that we are just used to, and it's not a bad thing we're used to, but sometimes we lack the full measure of wondering what it was really, truly like, because we've heard these stories our whole lives. And it's so easy to look at the Moses story and think about Moses and all that he did and all the good things, but what about the others? For some reason, we can't answer the question why God did not spare them. They were not spared. All flesh is as grass. I read that somewhere. We know that all flesh is as grass. Whenever God looks at life, he has a very different perspective on it. When he looked at all those sons that were being butchered, does anyone have the guts to say that they think that God was not looking at them with mercy and love and compassion? His perspective, though very different, we know his mercy was with them, right? We know he loved them because he loves humanity. And now we find ourselves stuck wondering and thinking about that kind of thing, but then if we find ourselves lost in that and what we end up doing as people, the beautiful part about the Bible stories is you can go to the Bible story and you can find that hope, but then you look at your own life. And sometimes we don't see it. Sometimes we allow ourselves to forget. That's why you need the story. That's why you need the word. Your emotional instability, which you have all the time. I know you do, because we all do. We're all people. We're all so weak. We're so pathetic, we people. And when we consider our own emotional instability, it's like no wonder we have the Bible, because it doesn't change. In the same place where it says that all flesh is as grass and withers and all these things, it says that the grass withers and the flowers fade, but the word of God shall stand forever. Including this story about Moses. And now I think about how insane his parents looked. You ever thought about how insane his parents looked? Now, they were backed into a corner, weren't they? All mothers know how easy it is to keep their child quiet. How difficult would that be? The guards now, there was a chuckle, and I meant it that way briefly, I meant it, as a bit of a chuckle. But you just go ahead and imagine yourself, you're a parent, and you've got guards with swords marching by your front door, and they start knocking. Or just go ahead and imagine you're in Poland during Nazi Germany time, and people are knocking on the door looking for Jews. things like that. I mean, this is real stuff. This is not fake. This is real. How would you feel as that parent? How much would your heart be thumping out of your chest? You know, we talked about worry this morning. Now, ain't no one not going to worry during that kind of time. You may have faith and you will keep that faith, but you will be shaking in your boots if something like that would have happened. So they were backed into a corner, and they had guards and soldiers marching by their house, and they said, we're going to keep this child alive no matter what it takes. We're going to try. How crazy did they look? They're thinking, we're going to give it a shot. We're going to put this baby in this basket, and we're going to float it down the river, and we're going to say a prayer. Big sister, watch. Watch him as he floats down the Nile River. Potentially in the tens of thousands were butchered, but one was spared. Now, you think about yourself, you think about what you as one individual living life, navigating through all these things, all the elements, good and evil. There's one thing that you have in common with Moses, at least now. God spared you. You're here. I don't believe that God doesn't have a purpose for anybody. I believe he's got a purpose for every single person he spares. Why he allowed those others to be butchered, I don't know. Maybe he was saving them from something worse. I don't know. I heard a saying once, you never know what worse luck your bad luck saved you from. You know, when you're trying to get somewhere and you decided, I'm going to be on time, and you weren't on time because nothing worked out right. Maybe he saved you from an accident on the freeway. Who knows? Those are the kind of things that we just don't know. Maybe he spared all the other people that you miss right now from something worse, but you are here. And that's what we have hope in. That's what we can do. We can do something with that. You can't do something with the people that you've lost. You can't do something with the people that may be lost, but you can do something for yourself. You can look at God and you can say, I have been made for purpose, and I'm going to make sure that I live it in faith. For to each and every one of us, there is set before you either a blessing or a curse. Moses had to make the choice. Didn't you just read it with me in verse 25? It says, choosing is what it says, rather than suffer affliction. He wasn't forced into it. God didn't make him do it. God gave him the choice. So what I'm going to ask you today is to make sure that you choose to be chosen. Does that make sense? You have to make sure that you choose to be chosen. Many are called, but few will be chosen. You have been spared, and there's something great and grandiose that you can and must do. You have to choose to be chosen to accomplish that, to fulfill it. Moses was spared. Moses went through all these events, and he grew through it all. But there is always the moment when each individual must take responsibility for what they choose and how they act in their faith. Jesus hung on the cross. He fulfilled all righteousness. In fact, he said that he would fulfill all righteousness. The good word says that he would fulfill all righteousness. But his blood didn't change so many of the other things that happened, so much of the chaos that happens around us. There are moments when we have to be so bold and so faithful that we have to do things regardless of what feels right or what seems right or what everyone else may say is right. And that's what Moses' parents did. They did something that was unique from all the other people. And God chose Moses to be spared. And your circumstance right now is to be in a place of immense thanksgiving that you have a chance to do the most powerful thing anybody could do, and that is continue in the work of the gospel. I am here, in some ways, preaching to the choir, right? Church has become a place for the saved, for the most part, you know? Church, it wasn't always so. People weren't so uncomfortable to go to church. I have a feeling that you have invited somebody to come join us here. I have a feeling that you sometimes feel a little bit vulnerable in inviting people to join us here. When you do invite people here, they're uncomfortable, aren't they? It's not easy. We're living in a world where God is actually systematically mocked. God is it's almost become a political thing for God to be mocked, almost. Just to talk about God in some organizations is considered atrocious in some places. Teachers might actually lose their job if they talk about God. And I have actually heard people say, now, I understand that perspective. I understand what people say. Well, I'm not going to talk about God. I remember hearing somebody say, one of the Lord's disciples say, well, I'm not going to talk about God in the classroom. I mean, the last thing I need is for a child to go home and for this child to say, well, Mr. So-and-so was talking about God. That's the last thing that this guy needs to happen, is what he said. What do you think Jesus would have done? Just stop and think about that for a second. I can just imagine Paul saying, well, I would preach in front of these people, but they might lynch me. So I'm not going to do it. That wasn't his attitude. That wasn't his perspective. Man, this is not an easy subject to think about. And many of us aren't really given to those kinds of circumstances. However, God spared you. You could have, any one of us could have been that person, that child that had some weird genetic condition that made it so you wouldn't be here. A lot of things would be different, but that didn't happen. Somebody either preached the gospel to you or preached the gospel to someone that you knew. And it somehow trickled into your heart, right? It somehow reached you. That's how it works. That's how it works. And I'm not talking about belittling people. Moses was known as the meekest man who walked the face of the earth. Moses is the one who actually kept God from destroying the people and starting over with him. Don't say to yourself right now, well, I'm a member of the Church of Christ. Because God can go outside that gravel out there and take even one pebble of gravel and make a member of the Church of Christ, right? Moses, he actually prayed on behalf of the people. Moses actually kept God from bringing his wrath upon him. When we take this precious gospel message and when we carry it with us and then we knowingly realize that God has spared us to be here, we take this message and we first of all, we share it, but we really live it too. And then we draw people in. We build something. That's what the last two sermons were about. We build something. We build something to gently make that transition easy and peaceful, even beautiful. And people worry about things. I know people. I know how much people worry. I know how much people try to take and keep control of things. I know. I've talked to countless people who are disciples of Christ who still struggle with their life. Right? What about the people who don't even have Christ? What about them? When we look at ourselves in a very introspective way, realizing all the struggles and all the needs that we have as people, we take a look at the world and we have compassion. We have meekness. We remember when Jesus said, "Come unto me, all you that labor and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." You know, too often it's, yeah, well, if you would just this, then this. And that's the way we talk to people sometimes. You know, that's just the way we do it. And for some people that works, you know, I mean, like really, so some people that works. With Peter, it worked. But there weren't a lot of Peters. Very few of them. That's why I take us to Moses. Learning these lessons and the way he was able to, you know, fulfill things throughout his whole life. From the very beginning, God spared him among all the others to survive and to live a full life. Then he comes to a point in verse 24 that he realizes who he really is. He had to come to a point where he refused something. There may be a moment in your life, maybe you've already reached it. You know, I'm talking to a whole room full of people here. Some of you still have to make a choice to refuse this one thing and get it out of here so it doesn't hold you back anymore. But then you continue through your life and then you choose to suffer. You actually make a choice to go down this path, even though this path stinks when it comes to the physical life. Very inconvenient. And then some people have to make their exodus. Some people have to leave something behind. Some people actually have to pick up, like Abraham did, like Moses had to do with his people. Hey, you know what? Let's hang around Egypt for a while and see if things get better. No, it's time to get out of here and do something else. I don't know where you are. And I'm like, no, don't leave Brentwood because I want you here. I don't want no one leaving, you know. But, you know, that does have to happen. I don't know where we would be if we were still in Idaho. We had to make our exodus. And people are like, to California? I don't know, it works. God knows something I don't. Because I had the same doubts. Like, I don't know, that place is getting crazy, you know. But no, here we are. In verse 28. Through faith, they kept the Passover. Through faith, they worshiped. Through faith, they actually had to do something that looked crazy. Again, when you take a look at a human perspective, the Egyptians, they weren't looking at them thinking, that's respectable, I'll try that too, as they're killing lambs and putting blood. That, this is a new type of decoration, is it? I mean, they look crazy, I'm sure. We don't have any record of it, but you think maybe some of those Egyptians thought, I'm going to go with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I'm going to see if this killing lamb thing works. Maybe they were proselytized and went with the children of Israel. I mean, God shows Rahab, a harlot, who wasn't Jewish. But sometimes we look nuts. That's okay, because God will bless it. God spared you to look nuts today. God spared you to look crazy sometimes. And then, verse 29. Verse 29. Huh. He opened the Red Sea, ladies and gentlemen. It was impossible for that to happen. Absolutely impossible. No way that could have happened. No way. He did. No matter how confusing life gets, no matter how difficult, no matter how many we have lost, no matter how hard it feels to let go and be vulnerable and to be totally dependent on him. Some people look at it and say it's impossible for that sucker to be saved. Well, he can do the impossible. And that's all we need to know. He's got it all. So when you look in front of you and you see this like big old, almost looks like an ocean in front of you, and you see a bunch of crazy army guys with chariots behind you, you look up and you say, I don't know how you're going to do it this time, but I know you will. And there's one thing, at least one thing you have in common with Moses. Among all the people who have been lost, all the innocent souls that have been taken, he spared you. So if you need God's saving touch today, he spared you to be saved. You were made to be saved. You were created to live forever. In the name of Jesus, may it be done today while we stand and sing.